A homeless pregnant girl just fixed a $400,000 Bentley in 60 seconds flat. She's starving, 8 months pregnant, living under a bridge in Lagos with nothing. Five professional mechanics with 20 years' experience couldn't start this billionaire's car for 3 hours. Then she walks up, touches three wires, and boom, engine roars to life. Here's the insane part. What she found under that car will make your blood run cold. A military-grade sabotage device, blinking red, worth $50,000. Someone wanted this billionaire dead at that exact spot, at that exact time. But wait, it gets absolutely crazy. The man who planted that device, he's wearing the same leather wristband she saw the night masked killers executed her parents in front of her eyes. Plot twist? This isn't just any homeless girl. She's the daughter of Lagos's most respected mechanic, murdered because he refused to let criminals use his workshop for surveillance. During 3 months of captivity, she overheard plans involving $200 million in human trafficking and government corruption reaching Nigeria's president. The shocking truth? Her mechanical genius that saved this billionaire's life just painted a target on both their backs. What happens next will blow your mind. 30 armed mercenaries siege the billionaire's mansion at 2 a.m. Live TV broadcasts turn assassination into public spectacle. A pregnant teenager faces professional killers who've spent millions trying to erase her from existence. And the ending? It'll change how you see every homeless person you pass, every moment mechanical genius meets deadly conspiracy, and prove that sometimes saving a stranger's life becomes the choice that destroys your peace forever. This isn't about car trouble. This is about what happens when someone with nothing to lose faces people with everything to protect. The conspiracy here will leave you questioning every coincidence, every breakdown, and every time exceptional talent meets people who want it silenced. Because sometimes the person who fixes your problem becomes the problem that almost kills you. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Could Listen to Engines. The Lagos sun beat down mercilessly on the stalled Bentley, its black paint reflecting heat waves that danced above the metal like angry spirits. Cars rushed past on the highway, their drivers craning necks to glimpse the spectacle of Nigeria's most expensive automobile, sitting helpless on the shoulder like a wounded elephant. Maxwell Anderson loosened his navy tie and checked his gold Rolex for the 15th time in 30 minutes. The board meeting that would determine the future of his telecommunications empire was scheduled to begin in 2 hours. And his empire's most crucial presentation lay trapped inside a machine that refused to acknowledge his billions. His driver, a competent man named Joseph who had served the Anderson family for 12 years, stood beside the open hood shaking his head in defeat. Behind them, two security guards in crisp uniforms maintained their vigilant positions, while sweat darkened their shirts. The tow truck that had arrived with great fanfare an hour earlier had departed in shameful silence, its operator muttering about electrical problems beyond his expertise. "Sir," Joseph said, his voice tight with frustration, "perhaps we should call for another vehicle. The backup Bentley could reach us within the hour." Maxwell's jaw clenched. The backup Bentley was currently being serviced, a fact that made this breakdown feel less like coincidence and more like cosmic conspiracy. "No, fix this one. I don't care what it takes." A roadside mechanic named Boniface had spent 45 minutes poking at the engine with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem his hands couldn't solve. His tools were scattered across the asphalt like offerings to a mechanical god that had refused his prayers. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he straightened, defeat written across his weathered features. "Oga, this car is speaking a language I don't understand," Boniface said, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "The engine turns, the fuel flows, the spark plugs fire, but something else is fighting against it. Something I cannot see." Maxwell's phone buzzed with another urgent call from his deputy CEO. The presentation that would secure their company's expansion into 3 West African markets required his presence, his voice, his commanding authority that had built an empire from nothing. But here he stood, defeated by metal and wires that cared nothing for his net worth. That's when she appeared. From beneath the concrete overpass where homeless families sought shelter from Lagos's unforgiving elements, a voice rose like a whisper carried on desert wind. "I can help." The crowd that had gathered to witness the billionaire's predicament turned as one. A young woman emerged from the shadows, her pregnancy unmistakable beneath a faded blue dress that had once been beautiful. Her natural hair framed a face that might have graced magazine covers under different circumstances, but poverty had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones and painted exhaustion around her eyes. She moved with careful deliberation, one hand supporting her swollen belly while the other trailed along the concrete barrier for balance. Her bare feet navigated the broken asphalt with the practiced caution of someone who knew that medical care for cut soles was a luxury beyond reach. The gathered mechanics and onlookers exchanged glances that ranged from amusement to contempt. Here was a homeless girl, visibly pregnant and clearly destitute, offering to solve a problem that had defeated trained professionals and expensive equipment. "Sister, this is not your business," Boniface said, not unkindly, but with the dismissive tone reserved for well-meaning but hopeless interference. "This is serious machine work." But Maxwell found himself studying her face, searching for the source of the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her despite her circumstances. Her eyes held something he recognized from his own mirror during the early days of building his empire, before success had insulated him from uncertainty. She had the look of someone who had learned to survive by being genuinely useful. "What's your name?" Maxwell asked, raising a hand to silence the objections brewing around him. "Amara," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My father taught me to listen to engines before he died. This one is trying to tell you something, but everyone is making too much noise to hear it." Joseph shifted uncomfortably. One of the security guards muttered something about wasting time. But Maxwell had built his fortune by recognizing potential in unexpected places, by listening when others dismissed, by taking calculated risks that separated visionaries from followers. "Let her try," he said. Amara approached the Bentley with reverence, her clay-brown eyes fixed on the engine bay with laser focus. She didn't immediately dive into the mechanical complexity like the others had done. Instead, she stood still, tilting her head as if listening to a conversation only she could hear. Her right hand, surprisingly steady for someone in her condition, reached toward the battery terminals. "Loose," she whispered, more to herself than to the watching crowd. Her fingers found the battery clamp and tightened it with practiced efficiency, but her expression suggested this was merely preliminary examination. She crouched carefully, wincing slightly as her pregnant belly made the movement awkward, and traced a thick ground cable from the battery to its connection point, near the engine block. The connection appeared secure to casual observation, but Amara's experienced fingers detected what others had missed. The connection was corroded, creating resistance that starved the electrical system. Using the edge of a coin she pulled from her dress pocket, Amara scraped the contact point until clean metal shone through the oxidation. The watching mechanics leaned closer, suddenly interested despite their skepticism. This wasn't random tinkering, this was systematic diagnosis. Her hand moved to a connector near the fuse box, pressing and twisting until it clicked firmly into place. The casual observer might have missed the subtle movement, but Amara had identified a loose connection that would cause intermittent power loss. "Try it now," she said, stepping back from the engine. Maxwell slid behind the wheel of his Bentley, conscious that a dozen pairs of eyes were watching for either vindication or embarrassment. He turned the key with the cautious hope of someone who had already endured multiple disappointments. The engine roared to life with the deep, confident purr that had made Bentley a symbol of automotive excellence. The sound was perfect, smooth, powerful, as if the car had never experienced a moment's trouble. The crowd erupted in amazed shouts. Bus drivers honked their approval. Street vendors applauded. Boniface stared at Amar with something approaching religious awe. Maxwell stepped out of the car, his mind struggling to process what had just occurred. Professional mechanics with years of training and expensive diagnostic equipment had failed where a pregnant homeless girl had succeeded in minutes. "How did you—" he began, but Amara suddenly swayed on her feet. Her hand flew to her belly, her face paling beneath the Lagos sun. Maxwell moved quickly, catching her arm as her knees buckled. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the hollow cheeks that spoke of too many skipped meals, the dark circles under eyes that had seen too much hardship for someone so young. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the highway noise. "Don't let them find me." "Who?" Maxwell asked. But before she could answer, her eyes filled with tears that seemed to carry the weight of untold stories. Chapter 2. The Workshop, where dreams were born. To understand how Amara could accomplish what defeated experts, one must first understand the small miracle that was Abina's auto workshop in the bustling Alaba market district of Lagos. It was here, among the scent of motor oil and the symphony of mechanical repairs, that a father's love for his craft became a daughter's inheritance. Abina Okafor was the kind of mechanic whose reputation traveled through Lagos like wildfire. Customers didn't just bring him broken vehicles, they brought him puzzles that other mechanics had declared unsolvable. His workshop, a modest structure squeezed between a fabric cellar and a phone repair booth, had become legendary among drivers who valued skill over flashy equipment. Unlike the modern auto repair shops with computerized diagnostic systems and factory-trained technicians, Abina's workshop operated on intuition, experience, and an almost mystical connection to mechanical problems. He could diagnose transmission issues by the sound of shifting gears, identify electrical problems by the pattern of dashboard lights, and predict engine failures weeks before they occurred. "Engines are like people, Amara," he would tell his daughter as she watched him work. "They have moods, they have voices, they tell you stories, if you know how to listen. The computer can tell you what is broken, but only your heart can tell you why it broke." Amara had been raised in this philosophy from the moment she could walk. While other children played with dolls or watched cartoons, she stood beside her father's workbench, learning to identify the subtle differences between the click of a dying relay and the tick of a timing issue. Her small hands learned to feel for loose connections, her young ears trained to distinguish between normal engine noise and mechanical distress. By age 12, Amara could perform basic maintenance tasks that would challenge automotive students. By 15, she was diagnosing problems that left visiting mechanics scratching their heads. Her gift wasn't just mechanical aptitude, it was an intuitive understanding of how systems interacted, how one small failure could cascade into major breakdown, how preventive care could extend vehicle life far beyond manufacturer expectations. The relationship between father and daughter was more than mentorship. Abina had never had sons, and his wife, Grace, had complications during Amara's birth that prevented further children. Rather than mourn the sons he would never have, Abina poured his passion into teaching his daughter everything he knew about mechanical systems. "In this country, people think women cannot understand machines," Abina told her one evening as they worked late to repair a truck that belonged to a struggling small business owner. "They think engines only respond to masculine hands. But you and I know the truth, don't we?" Amara nodded, tightening a bolt with the same confidence her father had shown her countless times. "Machines don't care about gender, Papa. They only care about knowledge and respect." The workshop became Amara's university, her playground, her sanctuary from a world that often seemed hostile to young women with mechanical ambitions. Regular customers grew accustomed to seeing her work alongside her father, and gradually they began requesting her specifically for certain types of repairs. Her touch with electrical systems was particularly noted. She seemed to have an instinctive understanding of how current flowed, where resistance occurred, and why connections failed. Word of the father-daughter team spread beyond their immediate neighborhood. Customers began arriving from distant parts of Lagos, bringing vehicles that had defeated other repair shops. Abina's reputation for honesty and skill was enhanced by Amara's fresh perspective and innovative problem-solving approaches. But success in Lagos's competitive automotive repair industry bred resentment as well as respect. Other workshop owners watched Abina's growing customer base with jealousy that gradually hardened into something more dangerous. Why should this one man command such loyalty when they struggled to attract steady customers? Why should his daughter, barely 18, demonstrate skills that their experienced mechanics couldn't match? The whispers started small. Accusations that Abina was stealing customers through unfair pricing. Suggestions that his rapid repairs came at the cost of quality. Rumors that success had made him arrogant and disrespectful to fellow mechanics. Amar noticed the change in atmosphere when they attended industry gatherings or purchased parts from suppliers. Conversations would cease when they approached. Prices would mysteriously increase. Orders would be delayed or accidentally filled incorrectly. Papa, she said one evening as they closed the workshop after a particularly busy day, the other mechanics are turning against us. Maybe we should be more careful. Abina paused in his cleanup routine, considering his daughter's words. He had built his reputation through decades of honest work and fair dealing, but he also understood that envy could transform decent people into enemies. Amara, he said finally, when you do good work and treat people fairly, you will always have enemies among those who do neither. Our choice is simple. We can lower ourselves to their level, or we can continue being who we are and trust that goodness attracts goodness. The philosophy that guided their work was about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. The success that had brought them pride and prosperity was also painting targets on their backs, targets that would attract attention from people far more dangerous than jealous competitors. 3 days before Amara's 18th birthday, the workshop received a visit from a customer unlike any they had served before. The man arrived in a Mercedes-Benz that gleamed despite Lagos's dusty streets, accompanied by 2 associates who remained in the vehicle while he conducted business. His name was Chief Emeka Nnamdi, and he claimed to represent a consortium of businessmen interested in investing in promising automotive repair operations. His proposition was straightforward. They would provide capital for expansion, modern equipment, and guaranteed customers in exchange for a controlling partnership in the business. Abina listened politely but declined immediately. The workshop was his life's work, built through personal sacrifice and maintained through personal integrity. He had no desire to surrender control to investors, regardless of the financial benefits they promised. Mr. Okafor, Chief Nnamdi said, his tone remaining pleasant despite the rejection. I think you misunderstand the nature of our offer. In Lagos, successful businesses require protection. They require connections. They require understanding with the right people. The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. Abina's response was equally clear. Chief, I appreciate your interest, but Abina's auto workshop will remain in the Okafor family. We have built our reputation without outside help, and we will maintain it the same way. After Chief Nnamdi departed, the atmosphere around the workshop grew noticeably tenser. Customers began reporting that they had been approached by strangers asking questions about Abina's business practices, his political affiliations, his family situation. Suppliers began experiencing problems with orders destined for his workshop. Amara felt the change most acutely. The respectful attention she had earned from male mechanics was replaced by something harder to define. Suspicious glances, whispered conversations that ceased when she approached. A sense that forces beyond her understanding were aligning against her family. Papa, she said one evening as they worked late to meet a deadline for a customer's truck. Something is wrong. People are acting strange. Even our regular customers seem nervous. Abina set down his wrench and studied his daughter's worried expression. At 18, she had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's intelligence, but she had also developed the mechanical instincts that made her invaluable to their operation. More importantly, she possessed the emotional intelligence to sense danger that others might miss. Amara, he said carefully, there are people in this city who believe that success belongs only to them. When they see someone like us achieving what they think should be theirs, they become angry. Sometimes that anger leads to actions that no decent person should take. Are we in danger? Abina considered lying, but he had always treated his daughter as an equal partner in their enterprise. She deserved honest answers, even when those answers were frightening. I don't know, he admitted, but I know that we will face whatever comes together, as we always have. And I know that the skills I have taught you will serve you well, no matter what challenges lie ahead. Neither father nor daughter realized that their conversation was being observed from across the street, or that the plans being finalized in air-conditioned offices would transform their lives within days. The workshop that had been their sanctuary was about to become the epicenter of a tragedy that would scatter Amara's world like sparks from a grinding wheel. The night that changed everything arrived without warning, as tragedies often do. Chapter 3. The Night When Shadows Had Hands. October 15th began like any other day in the Okafor household. Amara woke before dawn to help her father prepare for what promised to be a busy day at the workshop. 3 vehicles awaited major repairs, including a delivery truck whose breakdown threatened a small business owner's livelihood. The work was challenging but satisfying, the kind of mechanical puzzle that made both father and daughter grateful for their skills. Grace Okafor prepared her family's breakfast with the same care she had shown for 20 years of marriage. Plantains fried to perfect golden crispness, eggs scrambled with peppers and onions, fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery. The kitchen filled with aromas that made their modest home feel rich with love and contentment. Amara, her mother said as they shared the morning meal. Mrs. Adebayo stopped by yesterday while you were at the workshop. Her grandson wants to learn automotive repair, and she asked if you might consider tutoring him. Amara looked up from her plate, surprised. Tutorial requests had become increasingly common as a word spread about her mechanical abilities, but most parents assumed she would eventually abandon automotive work for more traditionally feminine pursuits. What did you tell her, Mama? Grace smiled, the expression that had first attracted Abina when they were both young and full of dreams. I told her that my daughter makes her own decisions about her time and her talents. If you want to teach young mechanics, that's your choice. If you want to focus on your own development, that's also your choice. After breakfast, Amara walked to the workshop with her father, enjoying the cooler morning air before Lagos's sun reached its punishing afternoon intensity. The streets were alive with the controlled chaos that defined the city. Vendors setting up roadside stalls, commuters boarding Danfo buses, children in school uniforms navigating between potholes and puddles. The workshop opened to a steady stream of customers, each bringing unique challenges that required different combinations of technical skill and creative problem solving. Amara found herself particularly absorbed in diagnosing an electrical fault that had stumped two other mechanics. The problem was intermittent, appearing and disappearing without obvious pattern, but she suspected a loose ground connection that only manifested under specific load conditions. As afternoon faded toward evening, father and daughter worked in comfortable synchronization. Tools passed between them without verbal requests. Complex repairs were divided instinctively according to each person's strengths. Customers observing their collaboration often commented that they seemed to share a single mechanical mind. Amara, Abina said as they prepared to close for the day, tomorrow we will tackle the transmission problem in that taxi. I want you to take the lead on the diagnosis. Trust your instincts, even if they contradict conventional wisdom. These words would prove prophetic in ways neither of them could foresee. The Okafor family shared dinner together that evening, a tradition that Grace had maintained despite the demands of running a household while her husband and daughter worked long hours. Conversation flowed easily between topics ranging from workshop stories to neighborhood gossip, to Amara's thoughts about possibly expanding their services to include motorcycle repairs. Papa, Amara said as they finished eating, do you ever think about what would happen to the workshop if something happened to you? The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Abina studied his daughter's face, noting the serious expression that indicated this wasn't casual curiosity. Why do you ask? I don't know. Lately, I've been feeling like things are changing, like we're building something that might not last. Maybe it's silly, but I want to make sure I can carry on what you've taught me. Abina reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. Her fingers were stained with motor oil despite thorough washing, a badge of honor that marked her as a true mechanic rather than a casual observer. Amara, everything I know about engines, I have shared with you. Everything I understand about business, you have learned by watching and participating. If something were to happen to me tomorrow, you could run this workshop better than most men who have been mechanics for 20 years. Grace cleared the dinner dishes while father and daughter continued talking, discussing technical challenges they planned to address, customer relationships they hoped to build, equipment purchases they were considering. It was the kind of ordinary family conversation that becomes precious only in retrospect, when it can never be repeated. At 10:30, the Okafor family prepared for bed. Grace completed her evening routine of checking doors and windows, a habit developed during years of living in a city where security could never be taken for granted. Abina reviewed the next day's work schedule, mentally organizing tools and parts needed for pending repairs. Amara studied a technical manual about fuel injection systems, constantly seeking to expand her knowledge beyond what experience could teach. None of them noticed the men gathering in the shadows across the street from their house. None of them detected the careful surveillance that had been monitoring their routines for weeks. None of them realized that their evening of peaceful domesticity would be their last. At 2:17 a.m., Grace Okafor woke to the sound of splintering wood. The front door, secured with two deadbolts and a security chain, had been kicked open with sufficient force to tear the frame from the wall. Heavy boots pounded across their small living room, bringing violence into a space that had known only love and laughter. Grace shook her husband awake, but Abina was already moving, his instincts sharpened by years of living in Lagos where danger could arrive without warning. He reached for the machete he kept beside the bed, a weapon that had never been used but provided psychological comfort in a neighborhood where police response times were measured in hours rather than minutes. "Stay here," he whispered to Grace, but even as he spoke, they could hear voices shouting Amara's name. Their daughter's room was at the back of the house, accessed through a narrow hallway that now echoed with threatening voices and heavy footsteps. Abina moved toward the sounds of invasion, prepared to defend his family with his life if necessary. What he found in the hallway would haunt his final moments. Three men in dark clothing and ski masks had cornered Amara in her doorway. Their leader, distinguishable by his size and the authority in his voice, was speaking in clipped professional tones that suggested military or police training. "Where are the records?" he demanded. "Where do you keep the customer information?" Amara's response was barely audible. "What records? We don't understand what you want." The question revealed the fundamental mistake that would cost the Okafor family everything they had built together. The intruders weren't random thieves seeking valuables they could sell. They weren't kidnappers looking for ransom money. They were conducting a specific mission with precise objectives, and they had been provided with information that was completely wrong. "Don't lie to us," the leader snapped. "We know you've been keeping records for Chief Namdi's competitors. We know you've been passing information about vehicle modifications, routes, schedules. Where are the files?" Abina stepped into view, his machete raised, but his voice attempting diplomacy. "Please, there has been a mistake. We run an automotive repair shop. We fix cars and trucks. We don't keep records about anything except maintenance schedules and parts inventories." The leader's attention shifted to Abina with predatory focus. "Mr. Okafor? The man who thinks he's too proud to accept partnership offers? The man who believes his little workshop makes him untouchable?" Recognition dawned in Abina's mind like sunrise illuminating a battlefield. Chief Namdi's investment opportunity had never been about business expansion. It had been about intelligence gathering, about monitoring the comings and goings of customers who might be connected to rival operations, about using the workshop as a surveillance post for activities that had nothing to do with automotive repair. "I told Chief Namdi we weren't interested in his offer," Abina said carefully. "That should have ended the matter." "Nothing ends until Chief Namdi says it ends," the leader replied. "And you made the mistake of thinking you could operate in his territory without paying tribute. You made the bigger mistake of thinking your daughter's skills gave you leverage over men with real power." The conversation that followed was brief and final. Abina attempted to negotiate, offering to close the workshop, to relocate his family, to do whatever was necessary to resolve the misunderstanding. But the men hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to send a message that would resonate throughout Lagos's automotive repair community. The shots that rang out at 2:31 a.m. were heard by neighbors who immediately turned off their lights and pretended to sleep more deeply. The Lagos police would eventually respond to reports of disturbance in the neighborhood, but their investigation would conclude that the Okafor family had been victims of robbery gone wrong, a tragic but common occurrence in a city where poverty and desperation often collided with deadly consequences. Amara watched her father fall to the hallway floor, his hand still outstretched toward her room, as if he could protect her, even in death. She watched her mother rush from the bedroom and collapse beside her husband's body, keening with grief that seemed to tear holes in the fabric of night itself. Then rough hands grabbed Amara, dragging her from the house where she had learned to love mechanical puzzles and dream of expanding her father's legacy. The men who had destroyed her family bundled her into a vehicle that smelled of cigarettes and gun oil, beginning a journey that would strip away every assumption she had ever made about safety, justice, and the predictability of human kindness. As they drove through Lagos's sleeping streets, one of the men made a phone call that Amara would remember for the rest of her shortened life. "It's done," he reported. "The workshop owner and his wife are eliminated. We have the girl." The voice on the other end was inaudible to Amara, but the man's response chilled her blood. No, sir, we weren't supposed to take her alive, but she might be useful for other purposes before we dispose of her. The vehicle carrying Amara disappeared into Lagos's labyrinth of side streets and forgotten neighborhoods, beginning a period of captivity that would last 3 months and leave scars that no mechanical skill could repair. When she finally escaped, pregnant and traumatized, Amara Okafor no longer existed in any official sense. Her family was dead, her home was occupied by strangers, and her name was connected to crimes she had never committed. The workshop where she had learned to listen to engines had been sold to pay debts that materialized after her father's death. Debts that were certainly fabricated, but impossible to challenge without legal representation she couldn't afford. The girl who emerged from captivity was a ghost haunting Lagos's underworld, surviving through mechanical skills that remained sharp despite everything else that had been broken. She fixed vehicles for people who paid in cash and asked no questions. She slept under bridges and in abandoned buildings. She carried within her body the evidence of violence that no court would ever prosecute. And on the morning when Maxwell Anderson's Bentley broke down on the Lagos highway, she was simply trying to survive another day in a world that had taught her the terrible lesson that talent and goodness provided no protection against powerful men who viewed other people as disposable resources. The woman who approached that broken Bentley carried within her not just mechanical genius inherited from a murdered father, but also knowledge that would prove far more dangerous than anyone could anticipate. Chapter 4. The Device That Shouldn't Exist. Maxwell Anderson stood beside his purring Bentley, watching Amara sway on her feet with growing concern. The woman who had accomplished the impossible now looked fragile enough to shatter at the next gust of wind. Her pregnancy was obvious, but so was her malnourishment, her exhaustion, her fear of something that went far beyond mechanical problems. "Amara," he said gently, maintaining his supportive grip on her arm. "You need medical attention, and food and rest. Let me help you." She looked up at him with eyes that seemed much older than her face suggested. "Sir, you don't understand. If they see me with you, if they know I helped you, they will come for both of us." Maxwell's frown deepened. In his world of corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations, threats usually came with clear motivations and identifiable adversaries. But Amara's fear seemed to encompass shadows that he couldn't see or understand. "Who are they?" he asked. Before Amara could respond, she suddenly stiffened, her gaze fixed on something beyond Maxwell's shoulder. Following her line of sight, he spotted a black SUV that had pulled to a stop behind his Bentley. The vehicle's windows were tinted dark enough to hide its occupants, but its presence had transformed Amara from exhausted to terrified. "We need to leave," she whispered urgently. "Now." But Maxwell's attention had shifted to something that made his own blood run cold. As Amara had crouched to examine his engine, she had disturbed dust and debris that had concealed something that definitely didn't belong under his Bentley's hood. Zip-tied to the frame rail, partially hidden by road grime but unmistakably electronic, was a small black device with a slowly blinking red light. Wires ran from the device to various engine components, and even Maxwell's limited mechanical knowledge was sufficient to recognize that this was no factory-installed equipment. "Amara," he said, his voice dropping to match her urgent whisper. "What is that thing under my car?" She followed his gaze and immediately understood why his Bentley had suffered mysterious electrical problems that had defeated every mechanic who examined it. The device was a sophisticated piece of sabotage equipment designed to create intermittent faults that would strand the vehicle at predetermined times or locations. "Someone wanted your car to break down," she said, her mechanical knowledge allowing her to read the device's purpose, even as her survival instinct screamed warnings about their exposure. "That's not mechanical failure, that's sabotage." The implications hit Maxwell like physical blows. His breakdown hadn't been random mechanical failure or even bad luck. Someone had deliberately sabotaged his vehicle, timing the failure to occur at this specific location, probably during his critical journey to the board meeting that would determine his company's future. But who would have the access, motivation, and technical sophistication to plant such a device? And why had Amara's simple electrical repairs been sufficient to overcome its effects? The connections you tightened, Maxwell realized. They bypassed whatever that device was supposed to do. Amara nodded, but her attention was focused on the black SUV, whose driver's door was opening to reveal a man in dark clothing. Even from a distance, Maxwell could see that the man's posture and movement suggested military or law enforcement training. Mr. Maxwell, Amara said, her voice tight with controlled panic. That device was supposed to keep your car broken until someone arrived to help you. Someone who never intended to actually fix anything. The man approaching from the SUV confirmed Amara's worst fears. As he drew closer, she could see the leather wristband that had haunted her nightmares for months. The letter N burned into the leather was clearly visible, marking him as connected to the network that had destroyed her family and stolen her freedom. Maxwell's security guards noticed the approaching stranger and moved to intercept him, but their body language suggested caution rather than alarm. They didn't recognize the threat that Amara could see clearly. "Sir Anderson," the man called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I see you found assistance with your vehicle troubles." The pleasant tone couldn't disguise the undertone of menace that made Amara's skin crawl. This man knew exactly why Maxwell's Bentley had broken down, because he had been part of the planning that made it happen. Maxwell stepped protectively in front of Amara, his instincts finally catching up to the danger that she had recognized immediately. "Who are you and what do you want?" The man's smile was cold and professional. "My name is not important, Mr. Anderson. What matters is that you've involved yourself in something that doesn't concern you." His gaze shifted to Amara with predatory focus. This girl has caused considerable trouble for people who don't tolerate interference with their business operations. Maxwell's guards finally recognized the threat, their hands moving toward concealed weapons. But the man raised his own hand in a gesture that seemed almost casual. "I wouldn't recommend escalating this situation, Mr. Anderson. You're a very public figure, and unfortunate incidents involving billionaires tend to attract unwanted media attention." The threat was sophisticated, wrapped in concern for Maxwell's public image while clearly indicating that violence remained an option. But Maxwell had built his empire by refusing to be intimidated, even when intimidation came with lethal implications. "Remove that device from my car," Maxwell commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had cowed corporate rivals and government officials. "Then explain why you think you have any claim to this woman." The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white and too sharp. "Mr. Anderson, you've built an impressive business empire, but you operate in boardrooms and legal frameworks. You don't understand the rules that govern people like me." As if responding to an invisible signal, the red light on the sabotage device began blinking faster. Amara grabbed Maxwell's sleeve with surprising strength. "Sir, please step back," she urged. "That device isn't just for disabling cars, it can be triggered remotely." Maxwell's eyes widened as he understood the implication. The device that had disabled his Bentley could just as easily be used to cause an explosion, especially with the fuel lines and electrical systems it had been wired to access. The man with the N wristband tapped the leather twice, and the device's blinking shifted to a solid red glow. "I'm going to count to 10, Mr. Anderson. When I reach 10, you're going to step aside and allow me to reclaim what belongs to my employer. If you don't, that device will demonstrate capabilities beyond simple electrical interference." Maxwell's mind raced through calculations of risk, probability, and potential outcomes. His security guards were outnumbered and outgunned by adversaries they couldn't clearly identify. The Lagos police response time would be measured in hours rather than minutes. And Amara, whatever her past, was clearly terrified of these people for reasons that went far beyond ordinary criminal activity. But Maxwell Anderson hadn't become one of Nigeria's wealthiest men by yielding to threats regardless of their sophistication. "1," the man began counting. "Amara," Maxwell said quietly, "when I give you the signal, run toward the traffic. Don't look back." 2. "Sir, you don't understand," Amara whispered. "These people killed my parents. They'll kill you too, just for helping me." 3. Maxwell's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Without breaking eye contact with the threatening stranger, he answered it. "Anderson." 4. "Sir, this is Detective Inspector Williams from Lagos State Police. We've received reports of suspicious activity involving your vehicle on the highway. Are you in immediate danger?" 5. Maxwell's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't contacted the police, which meant someone else had reported the situation. His gaze flicked to Amara, wondering if she had somehow summoned help, but her expression suggested she was as surprised as he was. 6. Inspector Williams, Maxwell said loudly enough for the threatening man to hear clearly. I'm standing next to my Bentley with a pregnant woman who has just discovered a sabotage device attached to my engine. We're being threatened by armed men who claim ownership of this woman. 7. The man's confident demeanor flickered slightly. Police involvement, especially with Maxwell Anderson as the victim, would generate media attention and official scrutiny that could complicate operations that depended on shadows and silence. 8. Sir, we have units responding to your location immediately. Detective Inspector Williams said, please remain calm and avoid any actions that might escalate the situation. 9. The man with the N wristband looked toward the black SUV, clearly weighing his options. Killing a billionaire in broad daylight on a Lagos highway would create complications that even his powerful backers might find difficult to manage. 10. Instead of triggering the device, the man stepped closer to Maxwell, close enough that his next words were clearly audible to everyone present. Mr. Anderson, you've chosen to involve yourself in matters beyond your understanding. This woman carries secrets that powerful people have died to protect. By helping her, you've made yourself a target. He turned his attention to Amara, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his earlier threats. We found you once, girl. We'll find you again. And next time, there won't be any billionaires or police to complicate matters. The sound of approaching sirens was now audible in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The man tapped his wristband again, and the red light on the sabotage device flickered, once before going dark. Whatever trigger mechanism had been installed was now deactivated, but the device itself remained attached to Maxwell's engine. This isn't over, the man said, backing toward his SUV. You've bought yourselves time, nothing more. As the black SUV sped away, disappearing into Lagos traffic, Maxwell found himself standing on a highway shoulder with a pregnant woman whose simple act of mechanical assistance had apparently triggered a war he didn't understand. The police units that arrived at the scene were more numerous and better equipped than typically responded to highway incidents. Detective Inspector Williams himself was among the responding officers, a tall man with prematurely gray hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had seen enough violence to recognize its approach. Mr. Anderson, Detective Williams said after securing the scene and photographing the sabotage device. This appears to be more complex than a simple vehicle breakdown. Can you explain how you encountered this woman and why armed men would be making claims about her? Maxwell looked at Amara, who stood beside his Bentley like a refugee seeking sanctuary. Her hands protectively cradled her pregnant belly, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much violence for someone so young. Inspector, Maxwell said carefully, I know very little about this woman's background. She approached my broken vehicle and diagnosed problems that had defeated professional mechanics. In the process, she discovered evidence of sabotage that suggests my breakdown was deliberately orchestrated. Detective Williams examined the device that crime scene technicians were now carefully removing from the Bentley's engine compartment. This is military-grade equipment, Mr. Anderson. Sophisticated electronics, remote activation capability, designed for covert operations rather than common criminal activity. Which suggests what, exactly? Which suggests that someone with serious resources wanted you stranded at this specific location, probably during your journey to this morning's board meeting. Detective Williams turned to Amara, his expression softening slightly. Miss, I need you to tell me about the men who threatened you. Everything you can remember about their appearance, their vehicle, their words. Amara's response was barely audible. Inspector, those men work for people who have connections everywhere. If I tell you what I know, I'll be dead within days, and probably anyone who tries to help me will be dead too. The detective's expression grew grim. Miss, I understand your fear, but without your cooperation, we can't protect you or investigate the people responsible for this incident. Inspector, Maxwell interrupted, this woman needs medical attention, food, and safe accommodation before she needs interrogation. Look at her condition. Whatever she's been through, she's barely surviving. Detective Williams studied both Maxwell and Amar for a long moment. clearly weighing competing priorities and institutional limitations. Mr. Anderson, I can arrange for protective custody and medical evaluation, but this woman will need to provide a statement about today's incident and any background information that might help us identify the perpetrators. And if the perpetrators have connections within the police force, Maxwell asked pointedly, if protective custody becomes another form of captivity, the question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Everyone present understood that corruption in Lagos's law enforcement agencies was common enough to make official protection a potentially dangerous proposition. What are you suggesting, Mr. Anderson? Maxwell looked at Amara again, seeing in her face a combination of intelligence, resilience, and desperation that reminded him of his own struggles during the early years of building his business empire. She had saved his life by recognizing sabotage that could have killed him. More importantly, she had demonstrated mechanical skills that defied explanation and suggested potentials that went far beyond her current circumstances. I'm suggesting that this woman comes with me, Maxwell said. My security team can provide protection while she recovers from whatever she's been through. When she's ready to give statements and provide information, she can do so under circumstances that don't require her to trust her safety to strangers. Detective Williams frowned. Mr. Anderson, this woman may be a witness to serious crimes. She can't simply disappear into private security arrangements that operate outside official oversight. Inspector, she won't disappear, but she needs time to recover before she can be helpful to any investigation. Look at her condition. She's pregnant, malnourished, and clearly traumatized. Throwing her into protective custody or detention will likely result in medical complications that help no one. Amara listened to this conversation about her future with the detached attention of someone who had learned that other people would always make decisions about her life. But Maxwell's proposal offered something she hadn't experienced in months, the possibility of safety that didn't come with obvious strings attached. Sir, she said quietly, if you take me with you, you'll be putting yourself in danger. These people don't just threaten. They kill anyone who gets in their way. Maxwell met her gaze directly. Amara, you saved my life today. You recognized sabotage that could have gotten me killed, and you solved mechanical problems that defeated experts. The least I can do is offer you safety while you recover your strength. After 40 minutes of negotiation involving phone calls to Maxwell's lawyers and Detective Williams' supervisors, an arrangement was reached. Amara would accompany Maxwell to his residence, where she would receive medical attention and secure accommodation. Within 72 hours, she would provide a complete statement to police investigators. If she attempted to leave Lagos or avoid cooperation with the investigation, she would be subject to immediate arrest. As Maxwell's Bentley finally resumed its journey toward Ikoyi, with Amara sitting carefully in the passenger seat and 2 police escort vehicles providing security, neither of them realized that their alliance had already been reported to people who viewed it as an unacceptable complication. The phone call was made from a secure location 30 minutes after they departed the highway scene. Sir, the girl has been taken into Anderson's protection. The billionaire is providing her with security and accommodation. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and absolutely cold. That's unfortunate for Mr. Anderson. Prepare a comprehensive response. If he wants to involve himself in our business operations, he should understand the full implications of that choice. What about the girl? The girl was always going to die. The only question was timing and methodology. Mr. Anderson's interference simply means we'll need to adjust our plans to accommodate a higher profile target. The phone call ended, leaving silence that felt heavy with approaching violence. Chapter 5. The Mansion Where Secrets Lived. Maxwell Anderson's mansion in Ikoyi rose from manicured grounds like a testament to what determination and intelligence could achieve in a single lifetime. The sweeping driveway wound through gardens that required a team of 6 groundskeepers to maintain, past fountains that sparkled in the afternoon sun, toward a structure that blended traditional Nigerian architectural elements with contemporary luxury. As the Bentley approached the main entrance, Amara pressed her face to the window with wonder that transcended her exhaustion. She had cleaned houses for wealthy families during her months of desperate survival, but nothing had prepared her for the scale of Maxwell's estate. Sir, she said softly, I don't belong in a place like this. Maxwell glanced at her through the rearview mirror, noting the way she unconsciously touched her pregnant belly when anxiety spiked. Amira, after today, you belong here more than most people who visit. You saved my life and probably prevented a catastrophe that would have affected thousands of employees. The electronic gates opened silently as sensors recognized Maxwell's vehicle, revealing a circular courtyard where 3 additional luxury cars were parked beside a fountain carved from imported marble. Security guards in crisp uniforms maintained discreet positions around the property, their presence obvious enough to deter casual threats but subtle enough to avoid creating a fortress atmosphere. Amara's door was opened by a guard whose gentle manner contrasted sharply with his obviously military bearing. As she stepped onto marble steps that probably cost more than her father's workshop had earned in a year, she felt the weight of curious eyes from household staff who had gathered to witness their employer's unexpected guest. The whispers started immediately, as whispers always do when established routines are disrupted by unfamiliar elements. Who is she? Why would Olga bring a homeless woman here? Look at her condition. She's pregnant and dirty. Maybe she's some relative from his village. Maxwell raised his hand, and the whispers died instantly. His staff had learned over years of employment that their employer demanded respect for everyone who entered his home, regardless of their apparent social status. "This is Amara," Maxwell announced clearly. "She's under my protection, and she'll be staying with us while she recovers from some difficult circumstances. I expect her to be treated with the same courtesy you would show any guest in this house." Mrs. Folake, the chief of household staff, stepped forward with the professional grace that had made her invaluable to Maxwell's domestic operations. She had managed wealthy households for 15 years, and she possessed the rare ability to make anyone feel welcome while maintaining the standards that luxury required. "Welcome, Miss Amara," Mrs. Folake said warmly. "We've prepared a room for you in the East Wing, with everything you'll need for comfort and privacy." Amara clutched her small bag tighter, a torn nylon sack containing a change of clothes and the few possessions she had managed to salvage from her months of homelessness. "Thank you, but I don't want to be any trouble. I can sleep anywhere. I'm used to making do with very little." Maxwell noticed the way his staff's expressions softened as they observed Amara's humility and obvious gratitude. Even in her current condition, there was something about her manner that suggested she had been raised with proper values by people who understood dignity. "Amara," Maxwell said gently, "you're not trouble. You're a guest who deserves comfort and care. Mrs. Folake will show you to your room, and Dr. Adeyemi is on his way to make sure you and your baby are healthy." The mention of medical attention brought tears to Amara's eyes. She had been carrying her child for 8 months without any prenatal care, relying on instinct and prayer to guide her through a pregnancy complicated by malnutrition and stress. "Sir, I can't afford a doctor. I don't have money for medical care." "You don't need money," Maxwell replied firmly. "Dr. Adeyemi is my personal physician, and he's coming here as my guest to care for my guest. There's no charge, no debt, no obligation, except to take care of yourself and your child." As Mrs. Folake led Amara toward the east wing of the mansion, Maxwell's phone buzzed with the urgent tone reserved for his most important business contacts. The caller ID showed Detective Inspector Williams, and Maxwell answered immediately. "Inspector, what can I do for you?" "Mr. Anderson, we've analyzed the device that was attached to your vehicle. This is military-grade sabotage equipment, probably manufactured in Eastern Europe. Definitely expensive enough to indicate serious financial backing." Maxwell moved toward his private study, where conversations about sensitive topics could be conducted without household staff overhearing details that might put them at risk. "What does that tell us about who planted it?" "It tells us that someone with substantial resources wanted you neutralized during this morning's schedule. It also tells us that the people threatening that girl have access to equipment and expertise that goes far beyond common criminal organizations." Maxwell settled into the leather chair behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by the artifacts of a career spent building one of Nigeria's most successful telecommunications companies. Awards, photographs with government officials, memorabilia from business deals that had shaped the country's technological infrastructure, all of it representing a lifetime of achievement that was apparently now under threat. "Inspector, what do you know about this girl's background? Why would professional killers be hunting a pregnant teenager?" Detective Williams was quiet for a moment, and Maxwell could hear papers rustling as the officer consulted his files. Mr. Anderson, that's where this case becomes very interesting. According to our preliminary investigation, Amara Okafor doesn't officially exist. What do you mean? I mean that every record associated with her identity was systematically destroyed approximately 8 months ago. Birth certificate, school records, family registrations, everything that would normally establish someone's legal existence in Nigeria has been erased. Maxwell frowned, understanding the implications immediately. Someone with government connections ordered her identity eliminated from official records. That's our working theory. And when people go to that much trouble to erase someone from existence, it usually means that person knows something that powerful people want to keep secret. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the study door. Mrs. Folleg entered with her characteristic discretion, carrying a tea service that Maxwell hadn't requested, but always appreciated during stressful situations. Inspector, I need to take another call. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow? Of course, Mr. Anderson. But please be careful. If our analysis is correct, the people hunting that girl won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way, regardless of their public profile or financial resources. After ending the call, Maxwell sat quietly in his study, contemplating the complexity of the situation he had entered by offering Amara his protection. He had expected to provide temporary shelter for a homeless woman who had helped him with a mechanical problem. Instead, he had apparently taken custody of someone whose very existence threatened people with the resources to wage sophisticated campaigns of intimidation and violence. Dr. Adeyemi arrived within the hour, carrying the medical equipment necessary to conduct comprehensive prenatal examinations. He was a man in his 60s who had been treating Maxwell's family and employees for more than a decade, and his manner combined professional competence with grandfatherly warmth. Maxwell, Dr. Adeyemi said as he prepared to examine Amara. This young woman is severely malnourished and showing signs of significant stress. Whatever she's been through, it's taken a serious toll on both her and her child. Can you help her? I can stabilize her condition and develop a treatment plan, but she's going to need weeks of proper nutrition and rest before she returns to normal health. And Maxwell, she's going to need emotional support as well as medical care. This isn't just physical neglect, this woman has been traumatized. The examination took place in the guest suite that Mrs. Folleg had prepared for Amara, a spacious room with its own bathroom and sitting area that overlooked the mansion's gardens. Amara submitted to Dr. Adeyemi's gentle ministrations with the passive compliance of someone who had learned to accept whatever treatment others decided to provide. Miss Amara, Dr. Adeyemi said as he completed his examination, your baby appears to be developing normally despite the challenges you faced. You're probably about 8 months along, which means you'll be giving birth within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Amara's eyes widened with an emotion that Maxwell couldn't immediately identify. Relief, perhaps, mixed with terror at the prospect of bringing a child into the world while being hunted by killers. Doctor, what if something happens to me? What will happen to my baby? Dr. Adeyemi glanced at Maxwell, clearly recognizing that this question went far beyond medical concerns. Miss Amara, you're under Mr. Anderson's protection now. Nothing is going to happen to you or your child. But even as the doctor spoke these reassuring words, a commotion outside the mansion's gate suggested that protection might be more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Maxwell's head of security, a former military officer named Captain Bello, knocked urgently on the guest suite door. Sir, we have a situation at the main gate. There are vehicles outside and the occupants are asking to speak with you about your house guest. Maxwell's jaw tightened. How many vehicles, Captain? 3 SUVs, sir. Approximately 12 men. They're not making threats, but they're also not leaving. Through the guest suite's windows, Maxwell could see the black shapes of vehicles parked beyond his estate's walls. The people who had threatened Amara on the highway had apparently decided that diplomatic pressure might be more effective than direct confrontation. Amara, Maxwell said, I need you to stay in this room while I deal with our visitors. Captain Bello will remain here to ensure your safety. Amara grabbed Maxwell's arm with surprising strength. Sir, please don't go out there. These people don't negotiate, they eliminate problems. Maxwell studied her face. noting the genuine terror that seemed disproportionate to the situation, unless she had first-hand knowledge of what these people were capable of. Amara, what exactly did these people do to you? Why are you so afraid of them? For the first time since they had met, Amara looked directly into Maxwell's eyes without flinching or looking away. What he saw there was pain so deep that it seemed to have carved permanent channels in her soul. They killed my parents, she said simply, and they kept me prisoner for 3 months while they decided what to do with me. When I escaped, I was already pregnant. The words hit Maxwell like physical blows. This wasn't just about mechanical sabotage or business rivalry. This was about people who had destroyed an entire family and were now determined to eliminate the only surviving witness to their crimes. Why haven't you gone to the police? Why haven't you sought official protection? Amara's laugh was bitter and hollow. Sir, some of the people hunting me wear police uniforms. Some of them have government identification. When your enemies include people who are supposed to protect citizens, where do you go for help? Maxwell was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what Amara had revealed. If her fears were justified, then his mansion's walls and security systems provided only temporary protection against adversaries who could potentially mobilize official resources against them. But Maxwell Anderson hadn't built his empire by yielding to intimidation, regardless of its source or sophistication. Captain Bello, he said, inform our visitors that they're trespassing on private property. If they want to schedule a meeting, they can contact my lawyers during business hours. And if they refuse to leave, sir? Maxwell's expression hardened with determination that had carried him through decades of business warfare. Then we call the media. Wealthy businessmen being threatened by armed strangers makes excellent television, especially when there are cameras to record everything that happens. Captain Bello smiled grimly, understanding immediately how media attention would complicate any plans that depended on operating in shadows and silence. I'll make the calls, sir. As his security chief departed to deal with the unwanted visitors, Maxwell turned back to Amara, who was watching the exchange with expressions that cycled between hope and resignation. Amara, I need you to tell me everything about your parents, about your captivity, about the people who are hunting you. If I'm going to protect you, I need to understand exactly what we're facing. Amara settled more deeply into the comfortable chair that was probably the softest place she had sat in months. Outside, she could hear vehicles starting and departing, suggesting that Maxwell's threat of media attention had been effective in dispersing the immediate threat. But both of them understood that this was only a temporary victory. The people hunting Amara had demonstrated patience, resources, and determination that suggested they would find other ways to accomplish their objectives. The war for Amara's life had only begun, and Maxwell Anderson had just enlisted as her primary ally in a conflict that would test everything he had learned about power, courage, and the price of doing what was right when doing right came with potentially lethal consequences. Outside, Lagos night settled over the mansion like a blanket that concealed watching eyes and patient predators. Inside, a billionaire and a homeless girl began planning how to survive enemies who had already proven they would kill anyone who stood between them and their objectives. The child in Amara's womb kicked softly as if sensing that the world it would soon enter was more dangerous than any place had a right to be. Chapter 6. The Truth About Blood and Money. Dr. Adeyemi's medical examination had revealed more than prenatal health concerns. As he treated the malnourishment and stress-related symptoms that Amara had endured during months of homelessness, he discovered evidence of violence that painted a horrifying picture of her captivity. Maxwell, the doctor said privately after completing his examination, this woman has been severely traumatized. The scarring I observed indicates systematic physical abuse over an extended period. Whatever happened to her, it wasn't random violence. It was deliberate and sustained. Maxwell felt rage building in his chest like pressure in an overheated engine. Doctor, in your professional opinion, what kind of people would do this to a pregnant teenager? People who view other human beings as expendable resources. People who use violence as a tool of control rather than an expression of anger. This wasn't personal cruelty, Maxwell. This was professional torture. That evening, as Lagos settled into its nightly rhythm of controlled chaos, Maxwell sat with Amara in the mansion's private library. The room was lined with books that represented his lifelong commitment to learning, surrounded by the comfortable furniture that had hosted countless business discussions and family conversations. Amara cradled a cup of tea that Mrs. Folake had prepared, the simple act of holding something warm and safe bringing tears to her eyes. After months of scavenging for survival, the luxury of hot beverages felt almost supernatural. Amara, Maxwell said gently, you mentioned that these people killed your parents. Can you tell me what happened that night? Amara stared into her tea as if the liquid might contain answers to questions that had tormented her for months. My father owned an automotive repair workshop in Alabama Market. He was very skilled, very honest, very respected by his customers. My mother was a seamstress who took care of our home and helped manage the workshop's finances. She paused, her voice growing stronger as she drew comfort from Maxwell's attentive silence. My father taught me everything he knew about engines and electrical systems. By the time I was 18, I could diagnose problems that stumped mechanics with decades of experience. That explains how you were able to fix my Bentley when others couldn't. Amara nodded, a faint smile crossing her face as she remembered happier times. Papa always said that engines speak to people who know how to listen. He taught me that every mechanical problem tells a story, and the solution comes from understanding what the machine is trying to say. Maxwell recognized the philosophy that had guided his own business success, the ability to listen to what others missed, to understand underlying patterns that weren't immediately obvious. What happened to change everything? Amara's expression darkened like sky before a storm. A man named Chief Emeka Nnamdi came to our workshop with an investment offer. He wanted to buy a partnership in Papa's business to provide money for expansion and modernization. Maxwell knew the name immediately. Chief Nnamdi was connected to some of Lagos's most influential political and business networks, a man whose wealth derived from sources that were rarely examined too closely. Your father refused the offer? Papa told him that our workshop was a family business and would remain a family business. Chief Nnamdi left, but he warned Papa that successful businesses in Lagos needed protection, needed understanding with the right people. The pattern was familiar to Maxwell, who had faced similar pressure from various sources during his company's growth years. But Maxwell had possessed resources and connections that allowed him to resist such demands. A small workshop owner would have been far more vulnerable. 3 weeks later, Amara continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, men came to our house in the middle of the night. They wore masks, but I could see their hands, their wristbands, their weapons. They accused Papa of keeping records for Chief Nnamdi's competitors, of spying on customers and passing information. Was that true? No! Amara's response was immediate and passionate. Papa kept maintenance records and parts inventories, nothing more. He never asked customers about their business, never collected information that didn't relate to repairing their vehicles. Maxwell nodded, understanding that Amara's father had been caught in a conflict that had nothing to do with his actual activities. They killed your parents because they thought he was spying for their rivals? They killed my parents because Chief Nnamdi wanted to make an example, because Papa had refused to pay tribute to people who thought they owned every successful business in Lagos. Amara's tears began flowing freely now, but her voice remained steady. I watched them shoot Papa in our hallway. I watched Mama die trying to protect him. Then they dragged me away, saying I might be useful for other purposes. The clinical nature of the violence was almost as disturbing as the violence itself. These weren't crime of passion murders. They were calculated executions designed to send messages to other business owners who might consider resisting similar demands. Amara, what happened during your captivity? She was quiet for so long that Maxwell wondered if the question was too traumatic to answer. But finally she spoke with the hollow tone of someone recounting events that felt disconnected from her own life. They kept me in different locations around Lagos. Sometimes a warehouse in Apapa, sometimes a house in Ikeja, sometimes rooms above shops in places I didn't recognize. There were always guards, always locked doors, always the understanding that trying to escape would result in immediate death. Did they hurt you? Amara's hand moved protectively to her pregnant belly. They used me as an example for other prisoners, to show what happened to people who caused problems for Chief Nnamdi's organization. They wanted to break my spirit completely before they decided how to dispose of me. Maxwell felt his hands clenching into fists. The people who had done this to Amara weren't just criminals. They were monsters who had systematically destroyed a family for the crime of refusing to surrender their independence. How did you escape? After 2 months, they moved me to a facility near the airport. There was a fire in the building next door, and in the confusion, some of the locks failed. I managed to get out through a window and ran into the crowd of people watching the firefighters. And you've been homeless since then? I had nothing. No family, no money, no identification, no friends who weren't afraid to help me. The workshop had been sold to pay debts that appeared after Papa's death. Debts that were certainly fabricated, but impossible to challenge without lawyers I couldn't afford. Maxwell understood the systematic thoroughness that had characterized Amara's destruction. Not only had they killed her parents and held her captive, but they had also eliminated every trace of her legal existence and economic foundation. Amara, why are they still hunting you? If they've already destroyed your family and taken everything you owned, why won't they leave you alone? Amara looked directly at Maxwell for the first time during their conversation, her eyes holding secrets that seemed too heavy for someone so young to carry. Because during my captivity, I overheard conversations about their operations. I learned about government officials who take bribes from Chief Anamdi. I discovered details about money laundering and weapons trafficking and human smuggling that goes far beyond what happened to my family. Maxwell felt a chill of understanding. Amara wasn't just a victim of random violence. She was a witness to criminal activities that could destroy powerful people if her testimony ever reached the right authorities. You could testify against them? I could name names, describe operations, identify locations, provide details about meetings I overheard and documents I saw. But sir, who would I testify to? Some of the people I could expose wear police uniforms. Others hold government positions. Others are judges and prosecutors and military officers. The scope of the corruption was staggering, but Maxwell had lived in Nigeria long enough to understand that such networks existed and operated with relative impunity because they had corrupted the very institutions that were supposed to oppose them. So they're hunting you to prevent you from testifying? They're hunting me because as long as I'm alive, I represent a threat to everything they've built. Even if I never say a word, they can't be sure I won't change my mind someday. The only way they can be completely safe is if I'm completely dead. Maxwell stood and walked to the library windows, looking out at his gardens where security lights illuminated paths between carefully tended flower beds. His wealth had purchased safety for decades, but Amara's presence had apparently invited danger that no amount of money could permanently deflect. Amara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Yes, sir. By helping you, by bringing you into my home, have I put my household staff at risk? Are these people likely to hurt innocent people just to get to you? Amara's silence lasted longer than Maxwell was comfortable with, but when she spoke, her honesty was absolute. Sir, these people view anyone who helps me as an enemy. They've killed entire families to eliminate single witnesses. If they decide that your staff represents a threat, they won't hesitate to eliminate that threat. Maxwell absorbed this information without immediate reaction. He had made his decision to help Amara based on humanitarian impulses and personal gratitude, but he hadn't fully considered the implications for other people in his sphere of responsibility. Then we need to make sure that doesn't happen, he said finally. Sir, the safest thing for everyone would be for me to leave. If I disappear, they'll have no reason to threaten you or your household. Maxwell turned from the window to face Amara directly, his expression carrying the same determination that had driven him to success, despite countless obstacles and setbacks. Amara, you saved my life today. More than that, you've shown me mechanical skills that suggest you could have a remarkable future if given the opportunity to develop them properly. I'm not going to abandon you to people who have already demonstrated they're willing to commit murder. But, sir? No arguments. We're going to find a way to keep you safe and bring these people to justice. It may require resources, time, and careful planning, but I didn't build a successful company by yielding to threats from people who think violence makes them powerful. That night, as Amara slept in a comfortable bed for the first time in months, Maxwell made a series of phone calls to contacts in government, law enforcement, and private security. If Chief Namdi's organization wanted to wage war against someone under his protection, they would discover that Maxwell Anderson had resources and connections of his own. But as he planned his strategy for protecting Amira and neutralizing the threats against her, Maxwell had no way of knowing that similar planning sessions were taking place in other locations around Lagos. Chief Namdi was not a man accustomed to having his plans disrupted by homeless girls and interfering billionaires. In his air-conditioned office overlooking Victoria Island, he studied surveillance photographs of Maxwell Anderson's mansion, while his associates provided updates on their failed highway operation. "Sir," his lieutenant reported, "the device was discovered and removed before it could complete its function. The Anderson vehicle is fully operational, and the girl has been taken into his protection." Chief Enamdi's expression remained calm, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Explain to me how a homeless, pregnant teenager was able to defeat technology that cost us $50,000 and 3 months of planning." "Sir, our intelligence suggested that the girl was simply a street beggar with no relevant skills. We had no information indicating she possessed mechanical expertise. Then our intelligence was fatally inadequate." Chief Namdi turned from the window to face his subordinates, his voice carrying the quiet menace that had intimidated government officials and business rivals for 2 decades. "The girl who disrupted our operation is Amara Okafor, daughter of the mechanic who refused our partnership offer last year." The men in the room exchanged glances that revealed their understanding of the implications. The workshop owner's daughter had been presumed dead after the family's elimination, but she had apparently survived and somehow ended up in a position to interfere with operations targeting Maxwell Anderson. "Sir, if she's the mechanic's daughter, that explains her ability to diagnose the sabotage device. But it also means she may have knowledge about our network that extends far beyond today's incident." Chief Enamdi nodded grimly. During her captivity, Miss Okafor was present during several planning meetings. She overheard discussions about operations, personnel, and financial arrangements that could cause serious problems if shared with the wrong authorities. "What are your orders, sir?" Chief Namdi walked to his desk where detailed floor plans of Maxwell Anderson's mansion were spread alongside surveillance photos and security assessments prepared by former military personnel who specialized in what they euphemistically called problem resolution. "Mr. Anderson has chosen to involve himself in matters that don't concern him. He's taken custody of someone who poses a direct threat to our operations, and he's apparently prepared to use his resources to protect her from the consequences of her interference." Chief Nnamdi picked up one of the surveillance photos, studying the image of Amara walking through Maxwell's gardens under the protection of armed guards. "Gentlemen, it's time Mr. Anderson learned that there are some conflicts that money cannot win, and some enemies that security systems cannot defeat." The planning session that followed was thorough and professional, conducted by men who approached violence with the same systematic methodology that characterized successful business operations. They discussed timeline, resources, contingencies, and acceptable collateral damage with the detached efficiency of people who had eliminated obstacles many times before. Chapter 7. When Shadows Have Artillery. 3 days into Amara's stay at Maxwell's mansion, life had begun to feel almost normal. Dr. Adeyemi's treatment was slowly restoring her health and energy. Mrs. Folake had arranged for proper maternity clothing that made her feel human again. The household staff had overcome their initial suspicions and begun treating her with genuine warmth. But normalcy was an illusion that would shatter at 2:47 a.m. on Thursday morning. Maxwell woke to the sound his security system made when perimeter sensors detected large-scale movement around the estate's boundaries. But this wasn't the soft chime that indicated a single intruder or wandering animal. This was the urgent electronic wail that meant multiple threats were approaching from multiple directions. Captain Bellow's voice crackled through the mansion's intercom system with military precision. "Sir, we have movement on all sides of the property. At least 20 personnel, probably more. They're moving with coordination that suggests professional training." Maxwell was already reaching for the secure phone that connected him directly to Detective Inspector Williams. But as he lifted the handset, he realized the line was dead. The attackers had apparently disabled communications before beginning their assault. In the East Wing guest suite, Amara woke to the sound of her door being knocked urgently. Mrs. Folake entered carrying a bag that had clearly been packed hastily. Miss Amara, we need to move you to the safe room immediately. There are armed men surrounding the property. Amara's hands went instinctively to her belly, where her child had been kicking more actively in recent days. Mrs. Folake, they're not just coming for me. Anyone who has helped me is now a target. The older woman's expression was grim but determined. Miss Amara, Mr. Anderson knew the risks when he brought you here. We all knew the risks. But we also know the difference between right and wrong. As they moved through the mansion's corridors toward the reinforced safe room that Maxwell had installed during the building's construction, Amara could hear sounds that chilled her blood. Boots on gravel, metal clicking against metal. The whispered coordination of people who were very good at what they did. Maxwell met them in the main hallway, flanked by Captain Bello and 2 other security guards. His face was grim but controlled, showing the same determination that had carried him through decades of business warfare. Amara, we're going to get through this, he said with confidence that seemed genuine despite their circumstances. The safe room can withstand anything short of military-grade explosives, and help is on the way. Sir, how can help be on the way if they've cut our communications? Yeah. Maxwell's smile was tight but triumphant. Because I learned long ago that people who operate in shadows don't expect their targets to have independent communication systems. As they reached the concealed entrance to the safe room, Captain Bello provided updates that painted an increasingly dire picture. Sir, thermal imaging shows at least 30 attackers positioned around the property. They have heavy weapons and what appears to be breaching equipment. The safe room itself was a marvel of engineering and paranoia, designed by security experts who understood that wealth made people targets for increasingly sophisticated threats. Steel-reinforced walls, independent air supply, communication equipment that operated on frequencies unavailable to civilian jammers, and enough provisions to sustain occupancy for several days. But as they sealed themselves inside, Amara realized that survival depended on more than just physical protection. Mr. Maxwell, she said quietly, these people won't just try to break in here. They'll threaten your household staff until you agree to surrender me. Maxwell's expression darkened as he understood the implication. Chief Namdi's men would use innocent people as leverage, knowing that Maxwell's conscience would eventually compel him to make the trade they demanded. Captain Bello, what's the status of our non-security personnel? Sir, Mrs. Folake and the domestic staff were evacuated to the servants' quarters, which have independent security systems. But if these attackers are determined enough... Captain Bello didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the safe room understood that reinforced doors and security cameras provided limited protection against people who were willing to torture hostages to achieve their objectives. Through the safe room's advanced surveillance system, they could see the attackers moving with military precision across the mansion's grounds. These weren't street criminals or opportunistic kidnappers. These were professionals who had planned their assault with the same thoroughness that characterized successful military operations. Maxwell activated the communication system that he had never hoped to use, connecting directly to a private security firm that specialized in what they diplomatically called crisis intervention. This is Anderson, authorization code Zulu 77. I need immediate tactical response to my Ikoyi residence. Armed assault in progress, civilian hostages at risk. The response was immediate and professional. Mr. Anderson, this is Control. We have your GPS coordinates and emergency protocols. Tactical teams are deploying from 3 locations and will reach your position within 15 minutes. But 15 minutes could be a lifetime when facing attackers who had demonstrated their willingness to kill anyone who interfered with their objectives. The first explosion came at 3:02 a.m., a carefully shaped charge that took out the mansion's main electrical systems without damaging the structure enough to collapse walls or ceilings. The attackers wanted the building intact for what would follow. In the suddenly darkened mansion, emergency lighting activated automatically, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made the surveillance monitors look like scenes from a war zone. Sir, Captain Bello reported, studying the thermal imaging displays, they're using the power outage to advance to breaching positions. They'll probably try to force entry through multiple points simultaneously. Maxwell turned to Amara, noting the way she held her belly protectively while watching the monitors that showed armed figures moving through her current sanctuary. Amara, I need you to understand something. These people are here because you're here, but leaving won't make them go away. They've committed themselves to this operation, and they'll complete it regardless of whether you surrender voluntarily. Amara nodded, her expression showing acceptance of a reality she had lived with for months. Sir, I know these people. They don't take prisoners except when prisoners serve their immediate purposes. Everyone in this house is a target now. The second explosion took out the mansion's main water lines, creating flooding that would complicate any extended siege while demonstrating the attackers' sophisticated understanding of the building's infrastructure. But as Maxwell watched the tactical display, he noticed something that gave him hope. The attackers were moving with the confidence of people who believed they faced only conventional security measures. They apparently hadn't anticipated the level of preparation that extreme wealth could purchase when combined with justified paranoia. Captain Bello, activate the perimeter deterrence. The safe room's monitors showed the immediate results of Maxwell's command. Hidden speakers throughout the mansion's grounds began broadcasting a message in multiple languages. You are trespassing on private property that is under surveillance by multiple law enforcement agencies. Your activities are being recorded and transmitted to authorities. Withdraw immediately or face criminal prosecution. More importantly, concealed non-lethal weapons systems began deploying throughout the gardens and approaches to the mansion. Strobe lights designed to disorient night vision equipment. Sound cannons that generated frequencies painful to human hearing. Automated systems that released tear gas and smoke screens to complicate coordinated movement. The attackers had expected to face conventional security measures, not the sophisticated defensive systems that Maxwell had installed after consulting with experts who understood asymmetric warfare. But Chief Namdi's men were professionals, and they adapted to unexpected obstacles with the flexibility that separated elite operators from common criminals. The voice that echoed through the mansion's public address system was calm, cultured, and absolutely cold. Mr. Anderson, this is Chief Emeka Namdi. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Maxwell activated the safe room's external communication system. Chief Namdi, the only thing I have is a pregnant woman who sought help after being tortured by your people? If that's what you consider your property, then we have fundamentally different understandings of human rights. Chief Namdi's laugh was genuinely amused. Mr. Anderson, you've built an impressive business empire, but you don't understand the rules that govern people like me. That woman has information that could damage operations involving very powerful people. She cannot be allowed to survive. Then perhaps those powerful people should have considered the consequences before committing crimes that created witnesses. The conversation was interrupted by a sound that made everyone in the safe room freeze with recognition. The distinctive whine of power tools cutting through metal, coming from multiple locations simultaneously. Captain Bello's voice was grim as he studied the building's structural sensors. Sir, they're cutting through the reinforced doors at 5 different entry points. They'll be inside the mansion within minutes. Maxwell realized that his defensive systems had bought time but hadn't prevented the inevitable. Chief Namdi's people were going to gain access to the mansion, and when they did, the lives of every innocent person in the building would depend on decisions made in the next few minutes. Amara, Maxwell said, I need you to tell me the truth. Is there any information you possess that could actually damage these people enough to justify the resources they're expending to silence you? Amara met his gaze directly, her expression showing the painful honesty of someone who had already lost everything that mattered to her. Sir, during my captivity, I overheard Chief Namdi planning operations that involve government ministers, military commanders, and foreign criminal organizations. I can identify bank accounts, meeting locations, and operational details that would destroy networks spanning multiple countries. Maxwell understood immediately. Amara wasn't just a witness to individual crimes. She was a repository of information that could unravel a criminal empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Could you testify in court? Would your testimony be sufficient to convict these people? If I lived long enough to reach court, and if the court itself wasn't corrupted by people with more power than any legal system. The sounds of cutting tools grew louder, punctuated by occasional explosions as the attackers systematically dismantled the mansion's defensive systems. Maxwell's sophisticated security measures were buying time, but they couldn't indefinitely resist a military-style assault conducted by people with professional training and unlimited resources. "Sir," Captain Bellow reported, "the first breach teams will enter the mansion within 3 minutes. The tactical response teams you called are still 8 minutes out." Maxwell made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "Captain, open the safe room. We're not going to hide while innocent people die to protect us." "Sir, that's suicide. These people will kill everyone in the building once they have the girl." Maxwell looked at Amara, seeing in her face the same determination that had driven her to approach a broken Bentley when every instinct told her to remain hidden. "Amara, are you willing to trust me with your life one more time?" She didn't hesitate. "Sir, you've already saved my life once. If you have a plan that might save other people too, I'm willing to try it." As the safe room's reinforced door began to open, Maxwell activated a communication system that Chief Namdi's people couldn't jam or intercept, because it broadcasted on frequencies monitored by every major news organization in Lagos. "This is Maxwell Anderson, broadcasting live from my Ikoyi residence, where armed men are currently conducting a military-style assault on my home. I am being attacked because I provided shelter to a pregnant woman who is a witness to crimes involving government corruption and international criminal organizations." The broadcast was being recorded and transmitted simultaneously to multiple news outlets, creating a situation that Chief Namdi's people hadn't anticipated or prepared for. "The people attacking my home are led by Chief Emeka Namdi, who has murdered entire families to protect a criminal network that reaches into the highest levels of Nigerian government and business." As Maxwell and Amara emerged from the safe room, they could hear Chief Namdi's furious voice echoing through the mansion's corridors. "Cut that transmission! Cut it now!" No. But Maxwell's communication system had been designed by people who understood that information could be more powerful than weapons when deployed strategically. The broadcast was being relayed through multiple redundant systems that would require sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities to neutralize. The final confrontation was about to begin, and for the first time since the assault started, Maxwell felt confident that justice might have a chance to prevail. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon against people who operate in darkness is simply turning on the lights. Chapter 8. When Light Conquers Shadow. The mansion's main hallway had become a battlefield illuminated by emergency lighting and the strobing effects of Maxwell's security systems. Armed figures in tactical gear moved through the space with practiced efficiency, but their movements suggested confusion about objectives that had suddenly become more complicated than planned. Maxwell and Amara emerged from the safe room to find Captain Bellow directing a defensive strategy that had transformed household staff into participants in their own protection. Mrs. Folake had armed herself with a kitchen knife and positioned herself to defend the route to the servants' quarters. Groundskeepers who doubled as part-time security were using their knowledge of the property's layout to outmaneuver intruders who relied on floor plans that couldn't account for local expertise. But the most significant change was the sound coming from outside the mansion. Multiple helicopters approaching from different directions, their searchlights beginning to illuminate the grounds with the harsh white light that turned night into artificial day. Chief Nnamdi's voice could be heard over the mansion's intercom system, no longer calm and controlled. "Anderson, cut that broadcast immediately or everyone in this building dies." Maxwell responded by increasing the transmission power, ensuring that his live broadcast was reaching not just news organizations, but emergency services throughout Lagos. "Chief Nnamdi, you're welcome to explain your position to the journalists and police officers who are currently listening to every word you say." The psychological impact of the broadcast was immediately apparent in the attackers' changed behavior. Military assaults depended on secrecy and deniability, on the ability to complete operations before external forces could respond. But Maxwell had transformed their covert operation into a public spectacle that was being recorded and transmitted across Nigeria. Amara watched the tactical monitors with the analytical eye her father had taught her to apply to mechanical problems. "Mr. Maxwell, they're pulling back from entry points. The broadcast is making them reconsider their approach. Because people like Chief Nnamdi survive by operating in shadows. When you force them into public light, they lose their primary advantage. The helicopters circling the mansion belong to news organizations, police units, and private security firms, all drawn by the live broadcast of a billionaire under siege in one of Lagos's most exclusive neighborhoods. Every action taken by Chief Namdi's people was now being recorded from multiple angles and transmitted to audiences across the country. Chief Namdi himself appeared in the mansion's main foyer, flanked by 6 men whose tactical gear couldn't disguise their military bearing. His expression showed the controlled fury of someone whose carefully planned operation had become a public relations catastrophe. "Mr. Anderson," Chief Namdi said, his voice carrying through the mansion's acoustics, "you've made this situation far more complicated than it needed to be." Maxwell and Amara descended the main staircase, accompanied by Captain Bello and household staff, who had chosen to stand together rather than hide separately. The symmetry was deliberate, 2 opposing forces meeting in open confrontation rather than conducting assassination and kidnapping in secret. "Chief Namdi," Maxwell replied, "I've simply revealed the truth about what you're trying to accomplish here. If you believe your actions are justified, explain them to the news helicopters recording everything that happens." For the first time since the assault began, Chief Namdi looked uncertain. His operation had been planned around eliminating witnesses and maintaining deniability, but Maxwell's broadcast had created exactly the kind of public scrutiny that made such operations impossible to complete successfully. "The girl has information that belongs to my organization," Chief Namdi said, apparently attempting to justify his actions to the listening audience. "She's stolen proprietary business information and used it to interfere with legitimate commercial operations." Amara stepped forward, her voice clear and strong despite her obvious fear. "Chief Namdi ordered the murder of my parents because my father refused to allow his workshop to be used for criminal surveillance. He held me prisoner for 3 months while his men decided how to dispose of me. During that time, I overheard plans for operations involving human trafficking, weapons smuggling, and government corruption." The words echoed through the mansion and across Lagos through Maxwell's broadcast system. Even if Chief Namdi succeeded in eliminating Amara, her testimony was now part of the public record, recorded and transmitted beyond his ability to suppress. "You're lying," Chief Namdi said, but his response lacked conviction. "You're a homeless woman with mental problems making false accusations against respected business leaders." Maxwell activated another feature of his communication system, one that he had hoped never to use. Video screens throughout the mansion began displaying images that he had received from Detective Inspector Williams. Surveillance photographs, financial records, and intercepted communications that documented Chief Namdi's criminal network. "Chief Namdi, these are evidence files compiled by law enforcement agencies investigating your organization, your own communications, your own financial transactions, your own operational planning documents." The impact on Chief Namdi's men was immediate and obvious. Professional criminals could accept risks that came with their chosen profession, but they couldn't accept exposure that would make their continued operations impossible. Several of Chief Namdi's men began backing toward exit points, clearly recognizing that the operation had become a tactical disaster. Public exposure meant identification, which meant prosecution, which meant the end of careers that depended on anonymity. "Sir," one of his lieutenants said urgently, "we need to abort this operation. The exposure level is beyond acceptable parameters." But Chief Namdi had invested too much in eliminating Amar to accept failure, regardless of the consequences. His expression hardened with the desperate determination of someone who understood that retreat would mean eventual destruction through legal processes he couldn't control. "No one leaves until the girl is eliminated and the broadcast is terminated," he ordered. "We finish this operation regardless of complications." The standoff that followed was tense with the potential for violence that could result in multiple deaths despite the public scrutiny. Chief Namdi's remaining men were trapped between orders from their leader and their own recognition that the situation had become untenable. That's when Amara made a decision that surprised everyone present, including herself. She stepped away from Maxwell's protective position and walked directly toward Chief Namdi, her pregnant belly prominent in the mansion's emergency lighting. "Chief Namdi," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the building and across the broadcast network, "you've spent months hunting me because you think I'm a threat to your organization. But you're wrong about what kind of threat I represent." Chief Namdi raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Amara's chest. "You know information that could destroy networks worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That makes you a threat that must be eliminated." Amara's response was calm and deliberate, spoken with the confidence of someone who had finally understood her own power. "Chief Namdi, the information I possess is already documented. Inspector Williams has my complete statement. International law enforcement agencies have copies of everything I witnessed during my captivity. Killing me won't protect your secrets. It will only confirm their accuracy." The silence that followed was heavy with implications that everyone present understood. If Amara's testimony was already recorded and distributed, then her death would serve no purpose except to provide evidence of Chief Namdi's guilt. Maxwell stepped forward, positioning himself between Amara and Chief Namdi's weapon. "Chief, your operation has failed. Your network is exposed, your people are identified, and your activities are being investigated by agencies you can't intimidate or corrupt. The only question now is whether you'll face those consequences as a kidnapper and attempted murderer, or simply as a criminal whose time has run out." Outside the mansion, the sound of additional helicopters suggested that law enforcement units were finally arriving in sufficient numbers to take control of the situation. The tactical teams that Maxwell had summoned were also approaching, their vehicles visible through the mansion's windows. Chief Namdi found himself facing a choice between certain capture and probable conviction, or a final desperate action that would accomplish nothing except ensuring his destruction. His decision revealed the essential character that had driven him to build a criminal empire through violence and intimidation. "If I can't eliminate the threat," he said, "I'll eliminate everyone associated with it." The weapon in his hand shifted toward Maxwell, but before he could fire, Amara moved with desperate courage that surprised everyone, including herself. Chapter 9. The Price of Courage. Amara's movement was instinctive rather than planned, driven by the same protective impulse that had guided her through months of survival. As Chief Namdi's weapon swung toward Maxwell, she threw herself between them, without considering the consequences for herself or her unborn child. The gunshot that followed echoed through the mansion like thunder, but the sound was immediately followed by chaos that no one had anticipated. Captain Bellow's tactical response was immediate and professional. His weapon discharged twice in rapid succession, targeting Chief Namdi with precision that ended the immediate threat while minimizing risk to bystanders. But the damage had already been done. Amara collapsed to the marble floor, her hands pressed against her abdomen where blood was beginning to stain her clothing. Maxwell dropped to his knees beside her, his hands moving instinctively to apply pressure to the wound while his mind struggled to process what had just occurred. "Amara, stay with me," he said, his voice carrying authority despite the fear in his eyes. "Help is coming. You're going to be fine." But Amara's expression suggested she understood the severity of her injury better than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Her mechanical training had included enough anatomy to recognize that gunshot wounds to the abdomen during pregnancy carried risks that no amount of medical care could entirely eliminate. "Sir," she whispered, "promise me something. Don't talk. Save your strength for the doctors. Promise me that if something happens to me, you'll make sure my baby has a chance at the life I never got to give him." Maxwell felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized what Amara was asking. "Amara, you're going to be fine. Both of you are going to be fine. I won't let anything happen to either of you." Mrs. Folake appeared with towels and medical supplies from the mansion's emergency kit, her movements efficient despite the tears streaming down her face. "The ambulance is coming, Miss Amara. Just hold on a little longer." Dr. Adeyemi arrived within minutes, having been contacted by Maxwell's security team when the assault began. His assessment was swift and professional, but his expression revealed concerns that he tried to hide from Amara. "We need to get her to surgery immediately," he told Maxwell quietly. "The bullet appears to have missed major organs, but there may be complications with the pregnancy." As paramedics prepared Amara for transport, Chief Nnamdi's surviving men were being taken into custody by police units that had finally breached the mansion's perimeter. The live broadcast had created a situation where denial or cover-up was impossible, forcing law enforcement agencies to respond with unprecedented speed and transparency. Detective Inspector Williams arrived as Amara was being loaded into the ambulance, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene of violence that had erupted in one of Lagos's most exclusive neighborhoods. "Mr. Anderson," he said, I need you to understand that this incident has created complications that extend far beyond Chief Namdi's organization. The people he was working with won't simply accept that their network has been exposed. Maxwell looked up from where he was kneeling beside Amara's stretcher, his clothes stained with her blood. Inspector, right now I only care about making sure this woman and her child survive. Everything else is secondary. I understand that, sir. But you need to know that by protecting her, you've made yourself a target for people with resources that make Chief Namdi look like a street criminal. The ambulance departed for Lagos University Teaching Hospital, with Maxwell riding alongside Amara, who drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey. Each time her eyes opened, she searched for his face with the desperate focus of someone trying to communicate something crucial. Sir, she whispered during one of her lucid moments. The workshop. Papa's tools, hidden compartment behind the workbench, evidence about Chief Namdi's operations, documents he thought were destroyed. Maxwell leaned closer to catch her words despite the ambulance's siren and the medical equipment surrounding them. Amara, don't worry about evidence right now. Focus on staying strong for your baby. Promise me you'll check. Promise me Papa's death will mean something. I promise. The surgery that followed lasted 6 hours, during which Maxwell waited in the hospital's private wing alongside Mrs. Folake and other household staff, who had insisted on staying until they knew Amara's condition. The waiting room filled gradually with people whose lives had been touched by Amara's courage. Mechanics from the market who had known her father, neighbors who remembered her family, even some of Chief Namdi's former victims, who had emerged from hiding once news of his arrest spread. Dr. Adiemi finally emerged from surgery with exhaustion written across his face, but relief in his eyes. The surgery was successful, he announced to the gathered crowd. Miss Amara is stable, and her baby is healthy. She'll need weeks of recovery, but both mother and child should survive without permanent damage. Oh. The cheers that erupted in the waiting room were audible throughout the hospital's corridors, a celebration of life that had triumphed over violence. But Maxwell understood that survival was only the beginning of challenges that Amara would face. Chief Namdi's network had been exposed but not entirely dismantled. Other criminals would emerge to fill the power vacuum he had left behind. And Amara's testimony, now documented and distributed, made her a permanent target for people whose freedom depended on her silence. Chapter 10. New Beginnings and Old Threats. 3 weeks later, Amara sat in a wheelchair in the hospital's maternity ward, holding her newborn son while Maxwell stood nearby with flowers and a birth certificate that would ensure the child's legal existence could never be erased. What will you name him? Maxwell asked, noting the way Amara studied her son's face as if memorizing every detail. Abina, she said without hesitation. After my father. So he'll carry the name of someone who chose integrity over safety. The baby boy's eyes were alert and curious, seeming to study the world he had entered with the same analytical attention his mother brought to mechanical problems. His survival, achieved despite the trauma of his mother's injury, seemed to represent hope that justice could prevail even in circumstances that seemed hopeless. Maxwell had used the weeks of Amara's recovery to investigate the information she had provided about her father's workshop. The hidden compartment behind the workbench had indeed contained documents that provided additional evidence about Chief Namdi's operations, including financial records that connected his organization to international criminal networks. But more importantly, Maxwell had used his resources to establish a legal trust that would ensure Amara and her son's security, regardless of what threats emerged in the future. The Maxwell Anderson Foundation for Justice and Technical Education would provide scholarships, legal protection, and career development opportunities for people whose skills and integrity made them targets for criminal organizations. Amara, Maxwell said as they prepared to leave the hospital, I have a proposition for you. She looked up from her son, noting the serious expression that indicated Maxwell was about to make another life-changing offer. My company is developing a new automotive research division focusing on electrical systems and diagnostic technologies. We need someone with your abilities to lead the technical development team. Amara's eyes widened. Sir, I don't have formal education or certifications. I only know what my father taught me. You know more about automotive electrical systems than engineers with decades of experience and advanced degrees? More importantly, you have the integrity to use that knowledge responsibly. The job offer came with a salary that would provide financial security, health benefits that would ensure proper medical care for her son, and legal protections that would make it difficult for criminal organizations to target her without facing serious consequences. But perhaps most importantly, it offered Amara the chance to honor her father's memory by using the skills he had taught her to build something positive rather than merely surviving the destruction that others had brought into her life. There's one condition, Maxwell added. The research facility will be built on the site where your father's workshop once stood. We'll create a memorial there, ensuring that his contribution to your education and to automotive innovation is never forgotten. Amara held her son closer, feeling emotions that ranged from gratitude to determination to a fierce protectiveness that would guide her choices for the rest of her life. Mr. Maxwell, why are you doing all this? You've already saved my life multiple times. You don't owe me anything more. Maxwell's response revealed the transformation that his encounter with Amara had created in his own understanding of success and responsibility. Amara, you taught me something that all my business achievements couldn't. You showed me that true strength comes from choosing to help others, even when helping them puts you at risk. You faced people who had already murdered your family, and you still chose to protect me from their sabotage. He paused, looking at the baby who would grow up in a world where his mother's courage had helped eliminate a criminal network that had terrorized countless families. Besides, the automotive industry needs people who understand that technology should serve humanity rather than exploit it. Your father's workshop was destroyed by people who viewed engineering skills as tools for criminal profit. Our research facility will prove that technical knowledge can be used to create justice and opportunity instead. 6 months later, the Abina Okafor Memorial Research Facility held its grand opening on the site where a small automotive workshop had once operated. The ceremony attracted government officials, international business leaders, and automotive engineers from across Africa, all gathered to celebrate an institution dedicated to developing technologies that would serve communities rather than exploit them. Amara, now serving as the facility's chief technical officer, delivered the opening address while holding her son, who had grown into an alert and healthy baby whose eyes seemed to take in everything around him with mechanical curiosity. My father taught me that engines speak to people who know how to listen, she said to the gathered crowd. But he also taught me that the most important conversations happen between people who choose to trust each other, despite the risks involved. She looked out at an audience that included former street children who were now enrolled in technical education programs, automotive workers whose skills had been enhanced through the facility's training programs, and business leaders who had committed to supporting ethical technology development. The research we conduct here will focus on making transportation safer, more efficient, and more accessible to people regardless of their economic circumstances. But more importantly, we'll demonstrate that technical innovation thrives when it's guided by moral principles rather than limited by them. Maxwell watched from the audience, noting the confidence and authority that had replaced the fear and desperation he had seen in Amara when she first approached his broken Bentley. The woman who had once survived by fixing vehicles for cash payments was now leading research that would influence automotive development across the African continent. But perhaps most significantly, her survival and success had inspired other victims of criminal organizations to come forward with their own testimony, creating a wave of prosecutions that dismantled networks of corruption throughout Lagos and beyond. Chief Nnamdi himself was serving multiple life sentences in a maximum security prison, his criminal empire replaced by legitimate businesses that provided employment and economic development without requiring bribes, violence, or exploitation. The device that had been planted under Maxwell's Bentley was now displayed in the research facility's museum, alongside exhibits that explained how automotive sabotage had been used by criminal organizations to target victims and how advanced diagnostic techniques could detect such threats. But the most visited exhibit was a recreation of Abina Okafor's original workshop, complete with the tools he had used to teach his daughter the skills that would eventually save Maxwell's life and expose a criminal conspiracy. As the ceremony concluded and guests moved through the facility's laboratories and classrooms, Amara found herself standing alone for a moment beside the memorial plaque that honored her father's memory. "Papa," she whispered, "I hope you're proud of what we've built here. I hope you understand that your teachings about engines listening to people who know how to listen has grown into something bigger than either of us imagined." The baby in her arms gurgled softly, as if responding to her words with approval. Maxwell approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt what was clearly a private moment between mother, child, and memory. Amara, your father would be amazed by what you've accomplished. You've transformed personal tragedy into public benefit, individual skill into institutional change. Amara looked around at the facility that bore her father's name, watching engineers and technicians working on projects that would improve transportation safety for millions of people across Africa. The workshops hummed with the same productive energy that had characterized her father's original operation, but on a scale that would have amazed the man who had taught her to listen to engines. Mr. Maxwell, she said, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't approached your car that day, if I had stayed hidden under the bridge and let you wait for professional help. Maxwell considered the question seriously. Honestly, I probably would have been killed. The sabotage device would have eventually caused a catastrophic failure, or Chief Namdi's people would have arrived to help and completed their assassination. Your courage to step forward saved both our lives. But it also put you in danger. It brought violence to your home, threatened your household staff, forced you to fight battles that weren't originally yours. Maxwell's response revealed the depth of transformation that his encounter with Amara had created in his understanding of wealth, responsibility, and purpose. Amara, those battles became mine the moment I decided that protecting innocent people was more important than protecting my comfortable isolation. You didn't force me into conflict with criminals. You gave me the opportunity to use my resources for something that actually mattered. He gestured toward the research facility where engineers were developing technologies that would make transportation safer and more affordable for people throughout the developing world. Everything we've built here exists because you chose to help a stranger despite the personal risks involved. Your father's workshop was destroyed by people who viewed technical skills as threats to their criminal operations. This facility proves that technical innovation can be more powerful than violence when it's guided by ethical principles. That evening, as the facility's opening celebration continued with traditional music and dancing that filled the memorial courtyard, Amara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from homelessness to leadership of one of Africa's most advanced automotive research institutions. The baby in her arms had fallen asleep despite the celebration continuing around them, his breathing steady and peaceful in the way that only comes from feeling completely safe and loved. Little Abina, she whispered to her son, you'll grow up in a world where your grandfather's name is honored, where technical knowledge is used to help people rather than harm them, where being skilled and honest doesn't make you a target for criminals. Mrs. Folake approached with a cup of tea and the gentle smile that had made Amara feel welcome during her first terrifying days in Maxwell's mansion. Miss Amara, you should be proud of what you've accomplished. Your father would be amazed to see how his daughter has honored his memory. Amara accepted the tea gratefully, noting how the simple act of being served by someone who cared about her well-being still felt miraculous after months of desperate survival. Mrs. Folake, sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. 6 months ago, I was sleeping under bridges and fixing cars for enough money to buy food. Now I'm running a research facility and giving speeches to government ministers. Mrs. Folake's expression grew serious as she studied Amara's face. Miss Amara, you're living the life your parents prepared you for, even if they couldn't have imagined the circumstances that would require you to use their teachings. What do you mean? Your father taught you technical skills that few people possess. Your mother taught you values that fewer people practice. The combination of exceptional ability and unshakable integrity is rare enough to change the world when circumstances allow it to flourish. As if summoned by their conversation about legacy and potential, Maxwell appeared beside them carrying a folder that contained documents bearing official government seals. Amara, I have news that I think will interest you. The Minister of Transportation has approved our proposal for a national automotive safety inspection program. We'll be training technicians across Nigeria to detect and prevent the kind of sabotage that was used against my vehicle. Amara's eyes widened as she understood the implications. Sir, that means thousands of people will learn skills that could save lives and prevent criminal organizations from using automotive sabotage as a weapon. Exactly. And the program will be based on diagnostic techniques that you've developed here, trained by instructors who understand your father's philosophy about engines speaking to people who know how to listen. The folder Maxwell carried contained not just government approvals, but also letters from automotive manufacturers, engineering schools, and research institutions across 3 continents, all expressing interest in collaborating with the Abina Okafor Memorial Research Facility. Amara, what started as your father's workshop serving neighborhood customers has become a model for ethical technology development that's attracting international attention. Universities want to study our educational methods. Manufacturers want to license our diagnostic innovations. Government agencies want to implement our safety protocols. As they stood together in the courtyard where Amara's father had once taught her to understand the language of machines, she realized that their work had transcended the personal tragedy that had almost destroyed her. The skills that had saved Maxwell's life were now being used to protect countless other people from similar threats. Mr. Maxwell, do you think Papa would understand what we've built here? Do you think he would approve of how his teachings have been expanded? Maxwell looked around at the facility where engineers worked late into the evening, driven by the same passion for mechanical problem-solving that had characterized Abina Okafor's original workshop. Amara, I think your father would be amazed by the scale of what you've accomplished, but I don't think he'd be surprised by the principles guiding your work. You're still helping people solve problems that others can't fix. You're still using technical knowledge to serve communities rather than exploit them. You're still listening to what machines are trying to tell you about the people who depend on them. As the celebration continued around them, Amara made a silent promise to the memory of her parents and to the future of her son. The Abina Okafor Memorial Research Facility would continue growing, but it would never lose sight of the fundamental truth that had guided her father's original workshop. Technical skill without moral purpose was merely sophisticated vandalism, but technical skill guided by ethical principles could literally change the world. The woman who had once approached a broken Bentley with nothing but inherited knowledge and desperate courage had become the leader of an institution that proved automotive innovation could serve justice as effectively as it served commerce. And in the end, that transformation represented the most powerful form of revenge possible against the people who had tried to destroy her family, using their own attempts at destruction as the foundation for building something that would help thousands of other families live safer, more prosperous lives. The child in her arms stirred slightly, as if sensing the importance of the moment, then settled back into peaceful sleep. Little Abina would grow up in a world where his grandfather's name was synonymous with integrity, innovation, and the understanding that the most sophisticated technology was useless without the human wisdom to guide its application. Epilogue. 5 years later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of the Abina Okafor Memorial Research Facility as Amara prepared for another day of leading the institution that had grown far beyond anyone's initial expectations. 5-year-old Abina played nearby with toy cars and trucks, already showing the same fascination with mechanical systems that had characterized his grandfather and mother. Maxwell arrived for their weekly planning meeting, carrying newspapers from 3 countries, all featuring articles about automotive safety innovations developed at their facility. The research center had become internationally recognized for developing diagnostic technologies that could detect not just mechanical problems but also evidence of sabotage and tampering. Amara, the European Union wants to implement our inspection protocols across all member countries. The technology you've developed here could prevent thousands of accidents caused by criminal interference with vehicle systems. Amara looked up from the technical drawings she was reviewing, noting the pride in Maxwell's voice. It's still hard to believe that work we started to honor Papa's memory has become something this significant. Your father's workshop served maybe 50 customers per week. This facility's innovations will eventually protect millions of drivers across multiple continents. The scale has changed, but the fundamental mission remains the same. Little Abina looked up from his toys, his bright eyes showing the same analytical curiosity that had characterized his grandfather. Mama, when I grow up, can I work with engines like you and Grandpa Abina? Amara knelt beside her son, studying his face and seeing in it a continuation of the legacy that had almost been destroyed by people who viewed technical knowledge as a threat rather than a gift. Little Abina, you can be anything you want to be. You can work with engines, or you can become a doctor or a teacher, or anything else that helps people solve problems and live better lives. But I want to listen to engines like you do, Mama. I want to understand what they're trying to say. Maxwell watched this conversation with the satisfaction of someone who had lived to see justice triumph over violence, innovation triumph over destruction, and hope triumph over despair. The facility that bore Abina Okafor's name had become more than a research institution. It had become a symbol of what could be achieved when technical excellence was guided by moral courage, when individual tragedy was transformed into collective benefit, when the memory of good people was honored through work that made the world safer for everyone. As they walked through the facility's laboratories and workshops, watching engineers and technicians who had come from across Africa to learn and contribute to their mission, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought her from a broken Bentley on a Lagos highway to leadership of an institution that was changing how the world thought about automotive safety. The device that had once been hidden under Maxwell's car was displayed in the facility's museum, alongside exhibits that explained how such sabotage could be detected and prevented. But the most meaningful exhibit was the recreation of her father's original workshop, complete with the tools he had used to teach her that engines spoke to people who knew how to listen. Children visited the museum on school trips, learning not just about mechanical systems but about the importance of using technical knowledge to serve rather than exploit, to protect rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. And sometimes, late in the evening when the facility was quiet, except for the hum of research equipment and the whispered conversations of engineers working on problems that could save lives, Amara would stand in the replica of her father's workshop and listen for the voice that had started it all. The voice that had taught her to understand what machines were trying to say. The voice that had given her the courage to approach a stranger's broken car. The voice that had helped her recognize sabotage that could have killed a good man. The voice that had guided her transformation from victim to survivor to leader. Her father's voice still speaking through every innovation developed in his name, every life protected by technologies he had inspired, every young engineer who learned that technical skill without moral purpose was just sophisticated destruction. The woman who had once fixed a billionaire's car with nothing but inherited wisdom and desperate courage had become the guardian of a legacy that proved automotive knowledge could serve justice as effectively as it served commerce. And in the end, that legacy represented the most complete victory possible over the people who had tried to silence her, using their own attempts at destruction as the foundation for building something that would protect thousands of other families from similar threats. The engines still spoke to those who knew how to listen, and Amara Okafor was still listening, still learning, still teaching others to hear what machines were trying to say about the people who depended on them. The broken Bentley that had started it all was now fully restored and displayed in the facility's courtyard, its engine purring smoothly as a reminder that even the most sophisticated problems could be solved by people who combined technical knowledge with moral courage. And every day, visitors to the facility could see the simple plaque mounted beside the restored vehicle. In memory of Abina Okafor, who taught his daughter that engines speak to people who know how to listen, and that the most important conversations happen between people who choose to trust each other despite the risks involved.